Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Carlton Carnivores Lowland Greenhouse. Got another species spotlight for you guys today. We're continuing with the Indochinese theme, and this species it's actually become one of my favorites because a lot of Nepenthes species, Saracene, and a few other plants are rather well known for being named after colors. And then the species tends to end up being a lot more variable than that color name suggests, like Nepenthes flava. A lot of pictures on that are not actually yellow, but may instead be brown or purple or reddish. But this one, it is named for its coloration, and in general, the species actually does overall fit that color description, and it's rather distinctive for that. This is an Indochinese species from Krabi province in Thailand, and it is Nepenthes rosea. Try and hold the nice good pictures up here. Rosea in Latin means rosy or pinkish, and if you look at that picture, it's obvious where this got its name. This is a true lowland species from southern Thailand. It's found from roughly around 400 to 520 meters above sea level. So that's roughly 1,300 to about 1,600 feet in elevation. Where these guys grow is very sandy or humus-rich soils in open forest or savanna-type habitats, or they also grow on sandstone and limestone cliff faces. So they're adapted to kind of two different very open habitats, both with fairly good drainage, but of course, due to the environment where they're in, at times of year, at the monsoon times, sometimes very, very wet conditions as well. Like other Indochinese species, it is considered to be a pyrophyte, so while I can't show it to you here, I did not clear out the root ball because it's so small at the moment. These guys do have very thick, kind of almost tuberous rootstocks that they will die back to during severe dry seasons or when fires go through during more moderate dry seasons. And so then they sprout back from that during the next monsoon season when there's moisture around. The plants themselves grow to a pretty moderate size for a Nepenthes, about 4 meters, so that's 12, 13 feet in length. But they produce a relatively thin vine. So a lot of Nepenthes species, especially as they get big, they may produce vines that end up being almost a half-inch thick or more. And even some of the other Indochinese species, even though they're relatively gracile, usually have thicker stems even than this species does. This species rarely exceeds about 4 millimeters, so less than half a centimeter in diameter, even on very large vines. So even though this is a small vine with really shrunken leaves because of the size of the pot it was in beforehand, the vine would not be much different even once the leaves start getting to full size. Leaves themselves, they're very slender, linear lanceolate, pretty typical for a lot of the Indochinese species. Fairly slender leaves, comes to a very thin point. The leaves come back and they are slightly decurrent down the stem, meaning the sides of the leaf where it meets the stem, the fringes of that side kind of continues down the stem a short ways. Less decurrent than a lot of the other Indochinese species. It's another distinct trait. The leaves grow to about roughly 8 inches long at maximum, and they will usually be overall glabrous, but may have tiny white hairs right along the edge of the leaves and sometimes down the midrib. Some of those hairs may also be present on the pitchers. The pitchers, of course, where this species gets its name from, are a very beautiful light coloration overall. So they grow to roughly about 6, maybe 7 inches tall at maturity. Lower pitchers kind of have an ovate, ovoid lower third to half of the pitcher, and then it constricts very slightly to produce a small hip, and above that it's cylindrical tubular, and they have a very small set of fringed wings that runs right down the front of the pitcher. The mouth is relatively round, fairly nondescript, Peristome is also very simple. It's rounded and just kind of curves slightly into the pitcher. A nice simple ovate lid. And of course, the coloration is what this species is named after. Lower pitchers may be relatively green, or they may be kind of flushed or mottled with these light pink and red colors. Never a deep red like you might see in Thorellii or Carrii or most of the other Indochinese species. They get very dark. This species tends to remain a very light, a very pale coloration. And oftentimes the peristome kind of stands out. It may end up being light red in some cases, but oftentimes it remains a very, very pale green to almost whitish coloration. And the interior of the pitcher enhances the look of that pinkish color because the interior is often almost a solid matte pink coloration as well. Very distinctive in this species. Upper pitchers. On this vine, my uppers currently are very, very tiny, but hopefully once it gets established in its new pot here, they'll start getting much larger. Upper pitchers are much more slender. They grow to about 7 to 8 inches tall, so slightly taller than the lower pitchers. And they are very slightly funnel-shaped at the very bottom of the pitcher before it reaches a small hip, and then tubular up above in approximately 4/5 of the pitcher length. So it's a very slender tubular pitcher. They lose the wings in the uppers on this species generally, but a lot of the other traits are relatively similar. They are paler than the lower pitchers. The coloration is usually this very pale greenish or yellowish, oftentimes with a very light pinkish tinge that just barely makes it through. It's especially noticeable right along just underneath the peristome or inside the pitcher again, kind of like how the lowers have that nice really pink interior even on lighter colored pitchers. These guys, that also is kind of retained just inside. So it's a very, very, very pale, peachy, salmon pink coloration that this gives off. Very distinctive. So again, these guys are an Indochinese pyrophyte species, so those vines that produce the upper pitchers, they often start developing relatively quickly. In a mature plant, once they start regrowing after a dry season, you may get rosettes for the first couple of months, and then that vine will shoot up over the next year or two, producing upper pitchers and then flowering. The flowers actually on these guys, the flower stalks, are kind of unusual too, because unlike most other species in the genus, they produce these two-flowered, not in the genus, but in the pyrophyte group, the Indochinese species, they produce 2 flowers on each peduncle. So the little stalk that comes off the main flower stalk holding the flowers, that splits and produces 2 flowers instead of just 1. And sometimes the next apical node that these plants usually start growing off of after they've flowered, it actually gets moved up onto the side of the flower stalk. So about 1/3 of the way up is where that little growth point gets moved up in some cases. And so you'll get new rosettes, new vines that start to grow actually off the base of the flower stalk, which is something that is only, I think, seen in Nepenthes fractiflexa, a completely unrelated species, actually in kind of the Maxima fusca group from Borneo. So that is very unique to this species in terms of the Indochinese group. Now, like most of the Indochinese species, these are relatively easy, straightforward to grow as long as you meet a couple requirements. Again, this is a true lowland species from southern Thailand, very tropical. So even though they experience seasons, those seasons are just wet and dry, not really hot or cold and such. You might get a slight decrease in temperature during the monsoon seasons just because moisture tends to do that. But otherwise, these guys will be growing preferably in conditions that are above 75 degrees Fahrenheit all the time. So that's the low temperature at night. During the day, it may get to 85, 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And once they're acclimated, they can be pretty tolerant of variable humidity conditions because during the dry season, you might see humidity down as low as 30, 40%. During the wet season, it might be as high as 80 to 90% during the day. So kind of variable on that. It's best to grow them in relatively high humidity to start with because like the other Indochinese species and like their relatives, Mirabilis, they do have relatively thin leaves, thin pitchers. So if they're not used to lower humidity already and you put it into low humidity, you will see all of the vegetation wilt immediately. So as a cautious aside, grow it in higher humidity just to make sure it stays happy. If you can acclimate it to lower humidity after you've gotten it stable, you can try and do that, figure out what works best in your conditions. For soil, again, in the wild, these guys will grow in kind of a sandy, humus soil mix. So you could grow it in a very, very loose, very sandy, perlite-filled peat mix. But like most of my Nepenthes, I will grow it in a sphagnum perlite cocoa chip mix. Substitute cocoa chips for anything else that is suitably chunky and well aerating. So my mix is roughly a 1 to 1 to 1 mix of those. So there's perlite and cocoa chips adding air. The sphagnum will hold in moisture. And then water it all the way through during the wet season, of course. Keep it nice and moist at that time. And then just kind of watch, let the top layer of the soils just start to dry out before you water again. And then if the plant shows any signs of stalling growth or going dormant, you can allow the soil to start drying out a little bit further. Don't let it get ever completely dry because you don't want to risk the roots completely dying off. But letting it dry to just barely damp during the drier seasons may actually help trigger things like flowering for these guys. But it's still, it was described in 2014, so at the time of making this video, that was 10 years ago, relatively short time for even Nepenthes, so it's still relatively uncommon in cultivation, but may become more common, especially as people like me start getting it growing bigger and taking cuttings. Like other Indochinese species, it should be relatively easy to take cuttings of and getting to root, just sticking those into wet moss or water and leaving them for a couple of months. But as of right now, still a relatively uncommon species. If you do find it, because rosea is a little bit different species, different looking from a lot of its relatives, it might fetch a slightly higher price. But I would expect it not to be an extremely expensive plant to find either, simply because the Indochinese, they don't have the weirdest looking of pictures in the group. People who grow them are usually doing so because they like subtle details, subtle differences, like I do. But if you can find it, again, it's a fairly easy, straightforward species to grow, and one of the more different looking of the Indochinese group, simply because of that really interesting coloration that it produces. Now that is all that I have for that species. There are a couple more that I will be covering, particularly in the Indochinese line soon, and then I will be covering a few others as I go through repotting still. But as always, if you enjoy educational videos like this, make sure to like the video, leave comments down below, watch all the way through, because that is really what helps the channel grow, actually. Those watch hours are really important. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the black bell so you don't miss anything coming up. If there's species that you would like to see, if there's a topic that you would like to see covered, you can always leave it in the comments below, shoot me a message. For more information, you can go to my website, carltoncarnivores.com, where I have the blog and database on the plants and animals that I work with. And of course, I'm always posting photos and little videos and tidbits on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. If you'd like to help in a more financial manner supporting these videos, the website, carltoncarnivores.com, does have an official shop system now on it, so you can go there and buy the plants that I sell, the resin gem jewelry that I have. I'm working on putting merch onto there and moving that over from the Teespring shop, although that link will also be in the video description below. You can also become a member at patreon.com/hcarlton. Members there get early access to the videos. I do monthly seed contests, giving away things that I don't generally have available on the website for sale. Special stuff that I only have like a packet or two of. Or if you don't want to subscribe for a monthly type thing like that, Patreon sometimes does allow one-time donations. You can also do donations at Coffee, or simply contact me if you'd like to just donate directly via PayPal or other means. And as always, until next time, I'm Hawken Carlton, and this is Carlton Carnivores.